Welcome to our deep dive into one of the most pivotal conflicts of the 20th century, the Korean War. A war that not only shaped the Korean Peninsula but also left a lasting imprint on global geopolitics during the Cold War era. The Korean War, fought from 1950 to 1953, saw North and South Korea battling on opposing sides with significant intervention from international powers. It began when North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea, which was backed by United Nations forces predominantly composed of American troops. The war was brutal, marked by fierce battles, extensive civilian casualties, and ended in a stalemate, with the Korean Peninsula still divided to this day. This conflict was not just a regional war, it was a critical front in the Cold War, highlighting the ideological clash between communism and capitalism. It played a crucial role in shaping the military and diplomatic strategies of both the United States and the Soviet Union, and profoundly influenced international relations in subsequent decades. In this video, we'll explore the origins of the Korean War, the major battles and turning points, the involvement of international forces, and the profound impact the war had on Korea and the wider world. We'll uncover why this war, often called the Forgotten War, should be remembered as a key chapter in world history. Let's start by looking at what Korea was like before the outbreak of war and how geopolitical tensions on the peninsula escalated to a full-blown conflict. Historical background of Korea before the war. The Korean Peninsula has a rich history characterized by periods of both unity and division. Its modern story intensifies in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Korea was an independent kingdom until it fell under Japanese occupation in 1910. This occupation was marked by harsh rule and efforts to suppress Korean culture, leading to widespread resentment and resistance among the Korean people. Japanese occupation. During World War II, Korea continued under Japanese control, where many Koreans were forced into labor and military service. The defeat of Japan in 1945 marked the end of its imperial ambitions and its occupation in Korea. This pivotal moment offered Korea a chance for independence and self-governance, but also invited international involvement in determining the peninsula's future. Division at the 38th parallel. After World War II, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel in what was intended as a temporary administrative division between the victorious Allies, the Soviet Union in the north and the United States in the south. Originally planned for a short-term period, this division was to facilitate eventual reunification. However, the escalation of Cold War tensions thwarted these plans. Political situation in North and South Korea pre-1950. Following the division, North and South Korea embarked on dramatically different political paths. In the North, Kim Il-sung established a communist government with the support of the Soviet Union, while the South, under Syngman Rhee, adopted a capitalist and authoritarian government backed by the United States. Both governments asserted sovereignty over the entire peninsula, leading to heightened tension and frequent border skirmishes. Role of international powers: USSR, USA, China. Major powers had significant geopolitical interests in the Korean conflict. The Soviet Union aimed to expand its influence in East Asia, seeing North Korea as a buffer against American and Western powers. The United States, seeking to contain communism, viewed South Korea as a crucial ally. China, post-Civil War, considered the Korean Peninsula strategically important and was prepared to support North Korea to prevent a U.S.-aligned neighbor on its border. The outbreak of the war. North Korea's invasion of South Korea on June 25, 1950. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel, launching a full-scale invasion into South Korea. This act of aggression was the immediate cause of the Korean War. Armed with Soviet-supplied tanks and heavy artillery, North Korea aimed to unify the Korean Peninsula under communist rule, initiating a conflict that would draw global attention. Initial response of South Korea and international community. South Korea, overwhelmed and underprepared for the magnitude of the assault, quickly found itself on the defensive. The international community, particularly the United States, reacted promptly to the crisis. The U.S., viewing the attack as a clear test of its policy of containing communism, quickly moved to intervene on behalf of South Korea, signaling the beginning of a major international conflict. United Nations involvement and the Security Council resolutions. In response to the North Korean invasion, the United Nations Security Council acted swiftly. With the Soviet Union absent from the vote and unable to use its veto power, the Council passed Resolution 82, condemning the North Korean aggression and demanding a withdrawal. This was followed by Resolution 83, which recommended that member nations provide military assistance to repel the North Korean attack. This led to the formation of the UN Command, spearheaded by the United States, marking the first instance of the United Nations using collective military force to maintain international peace and security. Section 3. Major phases of the war. Initial invasion and push to Pusan, 1950. The North Korean army, equipped with Soviet tanks and heavy artillery, quickly overran positions held by the ill-prepared South Korean forces. By early August 1950, they had pushed the South Korean and their fledgling UN allies into a small defensive perimeter around the port city of Pusan. This desperate stand would mark a significant early phase of the war. Despite being heavily outnumbered and outgunned, the South Korean and UN forces, led by the United States, mounted a desperate and determined defense at the Pusan perimeter. Their stand here prevented a complete takeover by North Korean forces and allowed the UN to bring in reinforcements and supplies, setting the stage for a counter-offensive. Incheon landing and recapture of Seoul, September 1950. Planning and execution of Incheon landing by General MacArthur. General Douglas MacArthur, commander of the UN forces, planned and executed a daring amphibious assault at Incheon, a city located on the west coast of Korea. The success of this operation was pivotal. It involved a series of complex naval maneuvers and landings designed to catch the North Korean forces by surprise and cut off their supply lines. Turning point in the war. The Incheon landing proved to be a dramatic turning point in the Korean War. It allowed UN forces to recapture Seoul, the capital of South Korea, just 2 weeks after the landing. This victory significantly weakened the North Korean position both strategically and psychologically, forcing them into a retreat back towards the north. Chinese intervention, November 1950. As UN forces pushed northward beyond the 38th parallel after the successful recaptures of Seoul and Incheon, China entered the war. Concerned about the proximity of a potential enemy on its border and the possibility of a UN-dominated Korea, China launched a large-scale intervention in late November 1950. Impact on UN forces. The entry of Chinese forces brought a fresh and formidable combatant into the fray. The massive Chinese troop influx caught the advancing UN forces off guard, leading to significant casualties and a strategic withdrawal. Pushback to the 38th parallel. The overwhelming Chinese numbers and renewed North Korean vigor forced UN and South Korean forces to retreat, culminating in a pushback south to positions around the 38th parallel by the winter of 1950-1951. This re-establishment of the line of demarcation signaled the beginning of a new phase of the war. Stalemate and peace talks, 1951-1953. Trench warfare and battle conditions. By early 1951, the war had settled into a stalemate with both sides entrenched along fortified positions near the 38th parallel. The conflict took on the characteristics of World War I-style trench warfare with frequent bloody skirmishes and limited territorial gains, which resulted in high casualties. Peace negotiations and challenges. Peace talks began in July 1951 at Panmunjom, within the borders of the demilitarized zone. These negotiations were fraught with difficulties and delays, influenced by mutual distrust and major disagreements over prisoner exchanges and the exact line of demarcation. It took 2 years of protracted negotiations before an armistice was finally signed on July 27, 1953, effectively ending the fighting but leaving the Korean peninsula divided along ideological lines. International involvement and impact. Roles and contributions of key UN nations. The United Nations' response to the North Korean invasion was swift and significant, marking the first instance of a collective military action under its banner. Key member nations contributed combat troops, medical assistance, and logistical support. The United States led this coalition, providing the bulk of military resources and personnel. Other significant contributors included the United Kingdom, Canada, Turkey, Australia, and several other Asian and European nations. These contributions were pivotal in bolstering South Korean defenses and eventually turning the tide of the war. Soviet and Chinese support for North Korea. The Soviet Union and China were instrumental in supporting North Korea, both politically and militarily. The Soviet Union supplied North Korea with military equipment, strategic advice, and direct air support, particularly in the early stages of the war. China's involvement escalated significantly with its large-scale troop deployment in late 1950. This intervention was crucial in preventing a North Korean defeat and shifted the balance of the war, reinforcing the North's capability to sustain prolonged military engagements. Effects of the war on global Cold War dynamics. The Korean War had profound implications for the global dynamics of the Cold War. It exemplified the ideological conflict between communism and capitalism, solidifying the division of the world into Eastern and Western blocs. The war also prompted a significant increase in military spending in the United States, leading to the expansion of American military bases around the world and intensifying the arms race. Moreover, the conflict entrenched the practice of proxy wars, where superpowers would support local forces rather than engage directly, a strategy that became a hallmark of Cold War confrontations in regions like Vietnam and Afghanistan. The war's aftermath and legacy. Ceasefire and Armistice Agreement of 1953. The intense conflict that raged across the Korean Peninsula for 3 years finally culminated in a ceasefire in July 1953. The Armistice Agreement, signed at Panmunjom, effectively ended the active combat but did not result in a formal peace treaty. This left the Korean Peninsula technically still at war, divided along the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, which closely followed the 38th parallel. The agreement also included provisions for prisoner exchanges and established mechanisms for conflict resolution between the North and South. Long-term impacts on Korea. Division and militarization of the Korean Peninsula. The Armistice Agreement solidified the division of Korea into North and South, a division that remains to this day. Both sides of the peninsula have remained heavily militarized, reflecting ongoing tensions and the global stakes of the broader Cold War conflicts. This militarization has had profound effects on the political and social structures of both countries, with significant resources devoted to defense rather than development. Economic and social aftermath in North and South Korea. The economic and social aftermath of the war varied dramatically between the North and South. South Korea, over the decades, transformed into a vibrant economy and a democratic society, largely due to significant economic aid and security guarantees from the United States and its allies. Conversely, North Korea turned inwards, building a militarized, centrally controlled economy under a strict authoritarian regime, which has led to widespread poverty and human rights issues. Influence on international military and political strategies. The Korean War had lasting impacts on international military and political strategies, particularly for the United States and its NATO allies. It reinforced the policy of containment of communism and led to increased U.S. military presence in Asia. The war also influenced the strategic doctrines of many countries, emphasizing the importance of rapid military response and alliances in ensuring regional stability. As we have explored today, the Korean War was not just a regional conflict, but a significant chapter in the global narrative of the Cold War, involving intense military engagements and profound geopolitical shifts. Starting with the unexpected invasion by North Korea in 1950, the war unfolded in phases, from the desperate stand at the Pusan perimeter to the dramatic Incheon landing and the eventual involvement of Chinese forces. The war ended with an armistice in 1953, leaving the Korean peninsula divided, a condition that persists to this day. The significance of the Korean War extends beyond its historical context, influencing contemporary geopolitics. It underscores the complexities of international relations and the lingering tensions that can persist even under a ceasefire. This conflict set precedents for how international powers engage with local conflicts, shaping policies that are still evident in today's diplomatic and military strategies. Thank you for watching this in-depth look at the Korean War. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a comment below with your thoughts or questions. Don't forget to like and share this video. Join us as we continue to explore the past to understand our present.